We are going to call this meeting to order now. It is 7 p.m. on December 12, 2022, and this is a public meeting of the City of Portland Police Accountability Commission Subcommittee on Access to Information. My name is Victoria, and I will be your facilitator tonight. If the Spanish language interpreter, Gabriela and Maria, can please give the information on the Spanish language interpretation, please.
Para esta cita, a través del Municipal de Oregon, va a ver interpretación en vivo en inglés y en español. Para que puedan tener la interpretación en español, solo escojan el globito y ahí escojan la opción en español o Spanish. Ahí van a tener la interpretación en vivo.
Muchas gracias. The city also offers ASL interpretation when it's being provided by Mary, and I didn't see his name, I forgot his name, but anyway. Yes, but Abel and Mary. Please pin their video feed to see their interpretation throughout the meeting. Finally, the closed captioning is turned on in Zoom as another means of assistance. But please note that this is an automatic captioning services and it is not always accurate. The city supports access to meetings of the Police Accountability Commission and can provide other language support as well. Please email in advance of future public meetings, either as a response to a public meeting notice or directly to policeaccountability@portlandoregon.gov to ask for other access assistance, including interpretation into other languages. This meeting is a public meeting subject to the City of Portland Administrative Code and Oregon State Law and is being recorded. For this meeting, the chat function is enabled for commission members to communicate with each other. Members of the public will be able to ask questions using Zoom's Q&A feature. As the commissioners are presenting or discussing things, if attendees have questions, please feel free to submit them through the Q&A. We hope to use this feature to help guide our conversation during the meeting and future meetings agenda topics. We like to be clear that not all questions will be answered during the meeting, but if answered, both the question and answer will be visible to you and will become part of the meeting record. To access this feature, just click on Q&A icon in the middle of your screen. Now I will pass it to the co-chairs for the land acknowledged.
Good evening, everyone. Co-chair Obi Gwoju, and thank you for being here. So the PAC currently uses the land acknowledgement on display at City Hall, which is as follows. We acknowledge that the rivers, lakes, streams, and lands of the lower Willamette River rest upon the occupied territories of the Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Chinook, Tualatin, Calapia, Molalla, and many other tribes. We recognize that the many villages, traditions, and cultures and relationships that existed along the river since time immemorial. We recognize that these tribes stewarded these lands and rivers since time immemorial for future generations. We recognize and undertake responsibility for the destruction of the river and land, of traditional food sources, sacred places, and multifaceted ways of life. We acknowledge the economic and social values that enabled the harm to the river, including systemic racism, classism, and other oppression that perpetuated harm against Black, Indigenous, and immigrant communities along the river. With this acknowledgement, we commit to honoring and learning from the past and working toward a more equitable and sustainable future for the lower Willamette River. We commit to seeking solutions that acknowledge the inequities of past socioeconomic policies and the harm done to people and our relationships to these lands and waters.
Thank you, Co-Chair Obi. Now we will resume a screen and review our community agreements. What we have been doing lately is reading these 2 pages of community agreements, but I will ask today to Commissioner Monica just to read one or two, any community agreements that you like, just for us to focus on it. Please.
Okay. I'll just go from the top. Our expectations of ourselves and of each other include keep the needs and concerns of the local community and the larger region at the forefront of the work. Always confront oppression. Keep focus on the objectives of the meeting and individual agenda items. Utilize facilitators to note additional topics for discussion. Arrive on time and prepared to the best of your ability. That was 4.
It's okay. That's perfect. Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Can we go to the next page, please?
This is the second page.
Do we all commit to the following, the community agreements for today's meeting and to gently calling in our college and collaborators if needed? And if you can show me a hand, so thumbs up. Thank you very much. I will pass it to co-chairs to discuss the timeline.
Great. So this meeting is part of the Police Accountability Commission's powers and duties phase of work. It is expected to go into January and will end when all 3 of the phases outcome documents are approved. This is the first of several phases in which the PAC will directly begin deciding what will go into the recommendations the PAC will send to the City Council for a new police accountability system, including the new oversight. This phase focuses on the functions of the new system. Future phases of work will develop the form of the new system, as well as how it relates to the rest of the city government and the transition plan from our current system to the new one. The Commission will present all proposed changes to the City Council in 2023 for the consideration and approval. This slide shows the outcome documents for the powers and duties phase, based on the agenda and scope approved by the Commission. These documents will each correspond to one of the subcommittees. One document will focus on how the new system will access needed information to do its work. The second on how it will handle administrative misconduct allegations against individual officers. And the third on how it will contribute to structural oversight of the Police Bureau. This slide is the current project plan for the powers and duties phase of the Police Accountability Commission's work. It will be updated as needed throughout this phase of work. This slide is for members of the public to be able to understand how the Commission gets from now through the end of the phase, which focuses on identifying areas of agreement among Commission members as to the functions of the new system. Today's meeting is a part in the light blue box with the red border near the center of the screen. Following today, here are the next few meetings of the PAC. This subcommittee meets again on December 29th. The subcommittee on structural oversight will meet on December 15th and will have a briefing from City Commissioner Joanne Hardesty. The subcommittee on officer accountability will meet next on December 19th and will have a briefing from IPR focused on their work on that date. The full commission will meet next in January. This is another way of displaying the same information on the last slide. We're trying out different ways to visually display information. Okay. So today's meeting agenda includes a briefing with Ross Caldwell and Eric Berry from the Independent Police Review, which includes hearing from the briefers, then a member Q&A, and finally a public comment and Q&A period related to the briefing. Following this, the bulk of the meeting will be spent on a discussion on access to information, including hearing from members as to what they've looked into in the 2 weeks, discussion on what should eventually be included in a new draft document, and then next steps for what subcommittee members can look into and draft between now and the next meeting of the subcommittee, which again is on December 29th. There will be an open public comment period, additional to the public comment on the briefing with IPR near the end of today's agenda.
Thank you, Co-Chair Obi. Now we're gonna go for the next item on the agenda. And we're gonna have the pleasure to talk and hear from Director Rose Caldwell and the investigations coordinator, Eric Berry. And I will pass it to you, to both of you, for the conversation and the presentation.
Thank you so much for having us. I think I've met you all before when Dana and I came to the full committee. Eric hasn't been here before. Eric is our investigations coordinator. He's got a ton of experience doing administrative investigations kind of in different ways. He can give a brief summary of that if that's something that you guys would like to hear about. But I know we've got a lot of questions to get through, so maybe we'll just jump into that if that's what you prefer. Should we just kind of go through these in order and, you know, we'll try to answer number one and then see if there's any questions, then try to answer number two and just go like that? Is that the best way to do it, do you think?
Sorry, Co-Chair Obi again. Whatever you guys are comfortable with, we are willing to do whatever you want to get as much information as possible. And thank you all for being here, by the way.
Okay, well, let's just try that because a lot of this stuff is pretty complicated. I think if we wait till the very end for follow-up questions, we might lose some threads. Some of them are interrelated, but we'll try to go just one at a time and then go from there. So Eric is our, having been an investigator for a long time and as our investigations coordinator, he knows more than I do about how we get some of these specific records. So I asked him to join us tonight, but just please jump in with questions whenever you'd like. Okay, so first question, can you briefly explain how IPR receives police records when requested? So I'll kind of tee this up and then hand it off to Eric. To start with, there's a lot of different kinds of police records and we get various things in different ways. I think a lot of people just think of a police record as a police report, but there's actually quite a bit more to it than that. So I think I'll let Eric take over on this one, and then I'll just try to jump in with anything else I think of, I guess. Eric, go ahead.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having both of us. I think this is my first time sitting before even a subcommittee of the PAC. So I appreciate getting to come in and answer questions for you today. Thank you. Regarding police records, the first thing I'm going to do is throw probably a whole bunch of acronyms at you. I want to make a distinction between some of the different sorts of police records that we obtain and where we go to get them. For typical police reports, and that would include a police report, a force data collection report, or any information from DIMS, that would be the Digital Information Management System, where you submit photographs and video footage associated with the case. We request and receive all that information by way of public records requests in the same way that a member of the community makes a public records request. So if we're screening a particular complaint, one of the first steps that we will do is order up the police reports that are associated with that. There's also other sorts of police record information available that we have to check out. We have direct access to the dispatch information system called VCAD, Visual Computer Aided Dispatch. We're able to look at that information directly and see what officers or what fire or other emergency equipment was sent to a particular call. So we'll often research VCAD as well as ordering the police reports by way of a public records request. There's other sorts of information that we have to obtain from the Bureau that we go through different routes to get. There are things called after action reviews, which is kind of the Bureau's internal investigation of a use of force. We obtain those directly by requesting them from the Internal Affairs Unit of the Police Bureau. Those AARs are stored in a different records management system than the police reports are stored in. And also during the course of our work, we'll have to obtain a lot of other information about training records. Sometimes we'll have to find GPS or other information about a police car. Those kind of records we're able to contact specialty units within the Police Bureau and obtain those records directly from those units. So for example, for an officer's training records, we would go directly to the training division and obtain those records. And finally, there are police records that we have to obtain from other law enforcement agencies. A couple of common examples would be Multnomah County Sheriff's Office. They oversee both jails in the area, and we're often requesting records from MCSO. We also commonly request police reports from other local law enforcement agencies, Gresham, Tualatin, Tigard, all the local police departments. We obtain those records by making records requests directly to those agencies as well. And I neglected to overlook legal records as well. Oftentimes in the course of an investigation or when we're screening a complaint, we may need to get a sense of where the accompanying legal proceeding is at, particularly if a complainant or a witness may be represented by an attorney. It's important that we contact that attorney to get their permission before we speak to somebody. So to review court records, we have direct access to another number of court information databases. Those include eCourts, PACER, and OGIN, or I guess OCGIM now, or JIM. And we will use those databases to look at where a particular criminal or civil case is. And I think that's as much police records as I can think of off the top of my head. Does anybody have any specific questions about how we access kind of specific chunks of police records?
Thank you. We have Co-Chair Obi and Commissioner Dan have raised their hand. Co-Chair Obi.
One quick question, and then a suggestion to us as well. The question is, do you ever have to have any sort of payment either from submission or from the guys to get these records? Perfect. And then we can also type questions out too, if that'll also help get things going. So thank you guys.
Absolutely.
We don't have to from PPB. There are, it's possible that from other agencies that, that could happen at some time, but I don't think it's very common. But with PPB, we don't have to spend any of our budget on that. If it's helpful, I can give, maybe I'll wait till after Dan's question, but Eric gave a list of all the different stuff we get. We can try to give an example for kind of how something would come in and then how we would use some of those different things in an effort to make it make more sense. But I know, Dan, do you want to go ahead and then I'll go on about that afterwards?
Commissioner, so Eric, are you gonna answer, or Commissioner Dan?
Oh yeah, Dan, did you have a question? I thought I saw you had your hand up earlier. Was there something you wanted to ask?
The co-chair asked it for me. Thank you.
Oh, okay, thank you. Sorry, catching up.
Okay. So if I could just try to finish up on number one real quick and then see if you have any other questions on that, to string this together a little bit. So say we get a complaint from someone who says, I was driving on I-84, I was pulled over by a Portland cop. I don't know who it was. They roughed me up and treated me discourteously and did a bunch of things. And they left that complaint for us on our voicemail or something like that. We would reach out to that person, get more information, and then we would probably start with the dispatch system that we have direct access to that Eric referenced earlier, which is called VCAD. And we would look to see what officers were maybe sent to a certain area. We could also use the GPS systems if we needed to. Sometimes we might need to do that to see what officers were in the area. Sometimes there's questions about, I know there were actually 4 officers there and we're only seeing a couple of them attached to the call, but maybe somebody else stopped by. So maybe we'd use that system to try to figure out who else was there. So from that information, we would be able to get like a call number or a kind of like a case number for PPB, an identification number. And the next step would probably be that we would request police reports or see if any reports existed. And so kind of all these systems, it sounds like this big alphabet soup of systems, but they all kind of interlink and interconnect to each other. So if we then got police reports and maybe there was a use of force, maybe then we'd say, okay, if there was a use of force, there would be one of these after action review process reports. And so now we want to get that report. So we contact internal affairs to get that report. So there's a whole bunch of different things that can all kind of relate. Somewhere in that, in that process, we might find out that somebody from Oregon State Police happened to be on scene or from Multnomah County Sheriff's Office. And then we want to figure out if they wrote a report. So we might make a request there. And so, all these things happening on one case would be probably kind of unlikely, but on any case, all these different things could happen. And so it's not as simple as we just get the reports from PPB or we tap into their system or anything like that. It's really kind of detective work going in a lot of directions. And I think that's what our investigators have to be really good at, is trying to figure out, okay, this person's just calling me and telling me they got pulled over on I-84 sometime after 10 o'clock on Friday night. Where do we go from there? And trying to like string that together and to get all the information that we need. It looks like another question.
Yes, Commissioner Sophia, please.
Yes, I had a question. Knowing all of these different systems and all these different places that you have to make your requests through for information, you have to know who to ask. Is there some, I want to call it a schematic of all the databases and how all those databases connect, so that, we'll have a complete picture of what kind of information is available and how one might request it and where they might go, and if there's maybe a system that can be set up to make a request for all of those at one time rather than doing them all individually.
I don't believe there is. Eric might know differently. I mean, we do kind of onboarding for our investigators that would incorporate some of this, but I don't think we have a schematic that shows all of that.
Commissioner Sophia, thank you for the question. Like Ross said, yeah, I'm not aware of there being a schematic or kind of a working diagram that shows you where you need to go to get particular pieces of information. There are some kind of shared systems where multiple agencies will feed information into. An example would be Region. That is the dispatch and report writing system that Portland and some of the local agencies use. But it gets complicated because other local police departments aren't a part of that system. So a big part of what Ross alluded to it at the beginning, a big part of what we do at the beginning of a complaint is try to figure out if a Portland police officer was involved in the incident. And that sounds kind of, I guess, a little bit silly, but that is one of the first things that we're trying to figure out. And we often have to go to a number of different places to figure that out.
And it's not uncommon for someone to say, I think this was Portland Police and it was another law enforcement agency or something like that. There's a lot of different law enforcement agencies operating within Portland kind of at any given time. So yeah, it's pretty complicated. Hard to give a short answer to.
I know, I understand. I appreciate that. Sorry, my audio. Is that better?
That sounds a little bit better. Yeah.
Okay. My concern is, what we don't know. I guess that's where I'm going. And finding some comprehensive database of what's available. That's all. Thank you.
Absolutely.
It's a lot of different systems. I mean, this is a problem with the broader criminal justice system, obviously, but it's a whole bunch of different systems that don't talk to each other. And then you need people who know how to, figure out, hey, there might be something over here. There might be something over here. Sometimes you make a lot of requests and you don't find anything. And so you're like, okay, well, I'm glad we checked. Maybe Oregon State Police wrote a report. Maybe they didn't. And then you kind of have to weigh in how much time all that takes, because all of these things take a lot of time, take a lot of capacity. And so, we're always kind of trying to figure out, is there something else we could do? Is there somewhere else that we should be looking? And, not all of them are that complicated. Some of them are pretty straightforward, and somebody calls and says, Officer Jones arrested me. I think I was racially profiled, blah, blah, blah. And then we know Officer Jones, we know we have an arrest report, and we can kind of quickly hone in on what we need to find out and who we would interview and where we would gather evidence. Because that's the ultimate goal, is to, as Eric said, figure out, is this a PPB member or not? And then, start trying to write allegations for what PPB directive was potentially violated, and then just try to gather evidence to put this together. Because beyond kind of having an idea of what may or may not have happened in an incident, or, what someone alleges would happen, we have to be able to prove it up to the evidentiary standards in order for something to be a sustained violation of policy. So, you're also kind of trying to deal with the burden of proof there as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And before we go to the question number 2, I know we know already this, but I will remind everyone that please keep your questions brief. We already have the questions there, but additional questions. And please allow me to facilitate this Q&A and ask questions that help this subcommittee develop understandings of current and future possibilities around access to information. Just a reminder, but thank you very much. We can go with question 2.
All right.
Okay. Thank you.
And that question was, what are the general timeframes established for a records request being initiated when the information is sent over? So I'll stick with just the records requests that we make to the police bureau at first. Those records requests, the records unit and the public records unit process all records requests in the order they are received. However, requests from independent police review are given priority within that. Generally speaking, a lot depends, how quick we get the record depends on how busy the records unit is. It can vary from the same day to several days to several weeks. Generally speaking, if we have been waiting for a week or more for a particular police report, I will expedite the request at that point. And that reflects kind of how busy the police records unit is. They have a very large and outstanding backlog of work there. And then in my experience ordering reports from other police departments in the area, the time frame really varies wildly from agency to agency. Generally speaking, kind of the larger a police department is, the more likely it is it has an established records unit and they're able to flip requests pretty quickly. But the smaller agencies, those requests can take some time as well. Are there any follow-up questions regarding the timeline for our public records requests?
I don't see any additional questions or comments. I think we can go to the third one.
Okay. Thank you. So the third question is, are there any limitations on how long you have access to certain documents? Can permission for information access ever be taken away? Generally, no. Once we have something, we have it. There are, I think Barry can give a more thorough answer to this than I can, but there are some things that are not allowed to be kept by the city, like by the police bureau or by us. So there is, for example, video taken by the forensic evidence division. And an example of this that came up a lot was in the 2020 protests. The forensic evidence division would be out filming the protests, and there's a state statute which prohibits the city from keeping those videos. And so when we are, when we're conducting an investigation and we need to get that video, we have to contact the city attorney's office. If they get the permission to watch that video, we then watch the video for our investigation, but we can't save it. And so that can kind of only live in the city attorney's office. So that's one thing I can think of, and Eric might be able to think of some more, but generally if it's a report, we get the report, it goes in our file because, our investigation is going to be reviewed by somebody, and then it's going to be, it's going to go to the chief of police or the mayor for an ultimate decision. We can make recommendations, but they make the decisions. And then our investigations are reviewed by the Department of Justice and the COCL team. And so when things are in the file, they're usually in the file to stay, but there is at least one exception to it.
The only two things that I might add, you will hear a couple of terms get thrown around when it relates to records, particularly sensitive records. You will hear people talk about retention schedules, and you will hear people talk about the custodian of a particular record. A retention schedule is just how long a particular agency keeps a particular record for. So IPR has retention schedules for the different types of information that we receive and hang on to. And we hold that for as long as the retention schedule specifies that we need to keep it, and then we dispose of it The other term is custodian of record, and that essentially means who is ultimately responsible for the ownership or maintenance of a record. And that comes into a play here, particularly sensitive records like the video footage that Ross was talking about, or maybe police bureau records that aren't normally released on public records requests. Generally speaking, what we have to be careful is not releasing that record to a third party. So we need to respect the original custodian of records authority over that document. So we would retain that record consistent with our own retention schedule, but we would defer all questions of release to the original custodian of record for that record.
And I would say one more thing that I just thought of, and this happened a lot in 2020 protest cases, but increasingly I think it's happening just in other interactions, is there are videos that'll be on social media that are constantly being put up and taken down. And so it's become really important for our investigators or for internal affairs, or if somebody's making a complaint to us, to grab those and save those as soon as you can, because there's a very good chance that it won't be there, you know, when you go back next week and try to find it to put it in your file. And so the tricky thing about that is, for somebody conducting an investigation, you can, you know, I mean, you can never search all of social media and know that you've searched everywhere, but we do our best. And then you know, you might find something and it might be gone later, or maybe additional things will be done later. But we have, you know, we have timelines in our work, so we can't just say, okay, we're just going to keep searching for this for more videos 24 hours a day. You know, at some point we have to say, okay, we've got to move this to the review phase. So social media presents really interesting challenges.
That's for sure true. Are there any follow-up questions related to document retention or anything like that?
Any additional questions? No. Thank you. We can go to the next question.
All right, we're moving on to question 4. And that question is, when records are sent to you, are there redactions? How is privacy of people in the reports maintained? So generally speaking, the police reports that we receive from the records unit will have the same information redacted from them as the police reports and other records that are sent to community members. By and large, that is some personally identifiable information, such as a person's driver's license number, information, DMV information about the registration of their vehicle, or their social security number. Other bits of identifiable information like their name and date of birth, current address, and telephone number is still included in the police report. Oh, and I can go on a little bit. By city code, we are authorized to have access to any Portland Police Bureau record. Sometimes we may need to get a piece of personally identifiable information if it relates to an investigation. We are ultimately able to obtain a copy of that record with the information unredacted. There are just additional steps that we have to go through to make that request. And kind of similarly, they don't typically release records on a live investigation. So a real common scenario is if a patrol officer takes a report and the nature of the crime is such that it's assigned to a detective for follow-up investigation, they may decline our initial request for those reports if the detective is still investigating the case. Ultimately, we're able to get those reports. There are just additional steps on our part.
And I think related to that, you know, sometimes we will get a complaint for someone who's facing criminal charges. And as Eric alluded to earlier, you know, if they're facing criminal charges, they should have a defense attorney. Although I know these days with the public defender crisis, that isn't always the case. But we always make sure we reach out to their attorney and see if they'd be willing to speak with us. You know, it's very important that somebody's not talking to us if they're facing criminal charges, and that their attorney is advising them properly on that. But you can get in a situation where somebody might make a complaint, their attorney doesn't want them to speak to you, and the police bureau is reluctant to hand over, you know, something that might still be investigated for additional charges or something like that. And so sometimes you kind of have to just say, all right, well, the criminal process is going to, kind of take its course, and then the administrative investigation process is going to have to follow that. Because someone's liberty could be at stake, and you don't want to kind of interfere with that or prejudice that in any way. So those situations can get pretty complicated, and they have to be reviewed on a case-by-case basis, but a lot to keep an eye on.
Thank you. And I will pass it to Commissioner Dan. He has a question. Okay.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Dan Handelman. I use he, him pronouns. I'm one of the commissioners and on this subcommittee. And good to see Director Caldwell and Investigator Barry here. Seen you many times in other contexts. So I'm going to quickly comment on something. You don't have to respond. And then I'm going to ask a question. My quick comment is, my understanding is that Social Security numbers are only really there for use in tax purposes and, and your financials, like the bank should have it. But I don't understand why the police would ever ask you for a Social Security number. My question is, this came up from somebody in the, who's actually in the audience tonight. When you're trying to get medical records, do you narrowly ask for the medical records that are only relevant to the case, or do you just get a waiver for all of their medical records? Thank you.
We usually try to keep it pretty narrow. Eric could probably be more specific, but we usually ask for someone's permission to release their records. That's the easiest way for us to get them.
Absolutely. Yeah, regarding the piece first, every healthcare facility has their own release, and for a release to be HIPAA compliant, it has to have room where you can specify the nature of records you're requesting, and you can include or exclude specific categories. Generally speaking, Dan, what we're going to request is the minimum medical information necessary to solve whatever investigation question that we're looking into. And so we'll only request that sort of information, and we only request it via a release from the person whose health information it is. Regarding Social Security numbers, however, people commonly contact the police to report identity theft. When they do so, they provide information, personally identifiable information, even their Social Security number. That information is necessary to investigate the crime of identity theft. And so that information will be included in a police report because it relates to the crime under investigation.
Any additional comments or questions? No? Okay, thank you. We can go to the next question.
Okay, thank you. I believe we are on number 5, which is what specific barriers, technical, legal, logistical, has the IPR encountered in regards to receiving information from the police? So that's a pretty big, huge, broad question, because as we talked about earlier, there's a lot of different kinds of records that we try to get. And so, you run into barriers. For one thing, like during the 2020 protests, a big barrier was those after action reviews of uses of force just getting completed. And so we weren't getting those because they hadn't been completed yet. Yet we had complaints that we needed to investigate, and we needed the information in those reports to be done. As Eric referred to earlier, the records division has a really significant backlog, and I think they just do not have enough employees working through that. And so that can create a barrier for us. So there could be logistical things there when I think capacity just gets overwhelmed in the police bureau, because we, ultimately need to get a hold of those records so that we can do our jobs. And so, when they've got problems, we have problems. One of the big frustrations, and I think we've talked to y'all about this a little bit before, is that we have to make the public records request to get the PPB reports. And those are just kind of the general reports. So we did get a bill passed that would allow us to get those reports directly. And there's kind of a whole incredibly complicated history there. The system that the police bureau uses is called Region. And there used to be multiple law enforcement agencies that use that system. And when they were all getting together and deciding to use that system so they could kind of share reports with each other and communicate with each other, they had agreements on who was allowed to see things. And it was kind of like, nobody additional besides those members of the region group, those law enforcement agencies, was able to have access to that information without the rest of the group approving it. And I think it would have been very, very, very unlikely for all these different law enforcement agencies to allow an oversight agency to have access to something that might touch on their agency, even if PPB wanted it. And I don't think that PPB did want it back then. Now PPB is actually willing and is trying to be helpful to us to get access to these reports, because they know it would allow us to get the records more quickly. And this would only be for kind of your general police report. It wouldn't fix everything, because as Eric said, there's a lot of reports that are held in different parts of the record system. And so we're now in the process of trying to implement that bill we passed, which allows us to have access to that. It's a pretty long process. The keeper of the Criminal Justice Information System, CJIS, which is what we need to get access to. I'm trying to gloss over some things here because it's very long and very complicated. So we can follow up on this more in the future if you want. But the keeper of that is Oregon State Police. So we have to jump through a bunch of hoops to get approval from Oregon State Police. They're going to have to do additional background checks of all of our employees. We already are kind of background check within an inch of our life, but they're going to have to do it within a half inch of our life or something. I don't know. So we're going to have to do that. They're going to have to look at our facilities, I think, and see where we're going to keep information that could have, these CJIS documents. So we're working on all that, but it just takes a lot of time. And I think that will eventually allow us to kind of do our own searches for certain types of police reports, which will be a big step forward. But that's kind of an example of, kind of one of the barriers. And we've been working on that. I mean, I think previous IPR directors have worked on that for a lot of years. Eric's been here longer than I have, so he knows the sordid history of it. But, we are in a position now where the police bureau is trying to help us get that, because I think it would actually decrease the workload for their records division. But it's just really, really complicated. And then Oregon State Police oversees that for the state. The FBI oversees what Oregon State Police does. So the FBI audits OSP, OSP will audit us. And so it is government bureaucracy at its finest. And that's why that's the short version of why it's taking so long. Eric, is there anything you wanted to add on number 5?
No, I think that kind of nicely captures a lot of the barriers. I'll say I've been at IPR for a minute. I've worked with, I think, 3 generations IPR command folk here on the issue, and things move pretty slow sometimes in the world of the government.
Yeah.
Thank you, Director and Investigator Eric. Well, okay, is there any questions from the commissioners? No. We can pass to the next question.
Okay. Number 6, I believe, which is what specific barriers has the IPR encountered in regards to compelling testimony? So the short version of this is right now, a PPB member has to be compelled by the chief of police. You probably know all that. I think we've talked about that before. We don't really have any problems with the way it's working now, but I think a lot of people don't feel that the chief compelling is the best way to do this. I think that they think that we should be able to compel independently. Functionally, it doesn't really matter. We get the interviews and we get them done. So while there could be other ways to do that, given all the other issues that we're trying to deal with, the last thing I was talking about getting records and all that, this isn't really one that I think has been the most important for us. So functionally, I think Eric can talk a little bit more about how this works, because he's actually been in a million of these interviews. I'm more reviewing them later, and we're talking about them before and then reading them after and talking about them after. But when we want to interview somebody, that has to be set up through internal affairs. That part of it is kind of a drag on time, because internal affairs has to go schedule that. And then we're scheduling, somebody from internal affairs to be there to admonish the PPB member to tell them to answer the questions. There's usually a union rep there. There's our investigator there. Depending on what kind of interview it is, there's often going to be a city attorney's office employee there. So it's not as simple as IPR saying, Officer Jones, we've got a complaint about you. Show up tomorrow at 11 a.m. and bring your union rep. It's trying to navigate 6 different schedules. And then sometimes if higher up members of the Bureau are not represented by a union in the same way, so they'll hire an attorney. And so then you're trying to, deal with attorney schedules and all that kind of stuff. So Eric can probably flesh this out a little bit more thoroughly, but the interviews do get done. It's just, it's a lot of cooks in the kitchen to try to get it on the calendar.
I think that's exactly it, Ross. For the issue of interviews, definitely scheduling is the bigger difficulty I've run into than the issue of having someone else compel the person that I'm about to interview. I'll just mention in passing, I don't know how familiar folks are with Garrity and stuff, but whether it be an IPR investigator interviewing an officer without internal affairs assistance, or the current system where the IA person reads the admonishment, in either case, because of the nature of these administrative investigations of government employees, we are required to compel that person to answer our questions. That falls under something called a person's Garrity right, and it relates to protecting them from incriminating themselves in a criminal prosecution. So there's always going to need to be somebody in the room compelling the person to speak. But generally speaking, yeah, it's just the scheduling 4 people or 6 people if you're adding attorneys. That is where the rubber meets the road.
Thank you, Eric. And Commissioner Dunn?
Thank you. I have a hypothetical question. Maybe this sounds like this has never happened to you, but let's say that one day the person from the Portland Police says, "I'm not going to compel that person for you. Sorry." Would you be able to go to another area of the government, let's say the Human Resources Division or somebody else who also has authority over all the employees, in order to compel that person to testify before you?
No, nothing like that has ever happened. And I'd be pretty shocked if something like that did happen. I don't know if BHR could compel them in the same way. I would think that there's a strong possibility that they could compel them as a city employee. I've never researched that. I think the first thing we would do probably is call elected officials and call the newspaper and say, "Hey, these guys are in complete violation of everything in city code that holds the system together." So yeah, I'm not sure if BHR would be an answer there, but nothing like that has happened. That would be for the duration of DOJ being in town. I know we're looking at things, planning for the future and way down the road, but that would also be a tremendously significant violation of the settlement agreement and any number of different things.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I can't think of something that has come close to that. And I was just that, Commissioner Dan, as you're asking your question, I was just imagining what I would do in reaction. I will say that when I have interviewed people, I've had different people express reluctance to maybe answer a particular question. And I've dealt with that via a number of different ways in the interview. But in terms of a person refusing to give an admonishment on my behalf, I just can't think of a time when it has ever happened. I think my move would be to go get a different person from IA and have them give me the admonishment and then report the first person's actions to Ross, I think, and figure out what we want to do about it.
Yeah, it's certainly not unheard of for somebody in an interview, usually the subject of the interview, to be reluctant to answer questions and further allegations coming from that. And so and that does get officers in trouble at times. And that is kind of like the cover up is worse than the crime. If they get upset about it and they refuse to answer questions, then they're going to get, potentially a truthfulness allegation or something really, really serious. I think if somebody refused to admonish someone, Eric's right, they'd be facing their own set of allegations immediately. But nothing like that's ever happened. We do, you do encounter people kind of pushing back against questions and not, maybe not being happy to answer questions or not being happy to be drug in for an interview. And frankly, the people that are really, really, really helpful with that are often internal affairs. And there are certain people in law enforcement that I think are they're very, very chain of command oriented. And sometimes they don't see us as within that chain of command, regardless of what all the rules are. But when there's a higher member of the police bureau sitting there, internal affairs generally is really, really helpful with that situation. And so there's I can think of a lot of examples where our investigators have benefited from internal affairs being in the room. If for example, you get a union rep who starts to kind of butt in and say, hey, I don't think you can ask that, which does happen from time to time. Internal affairs is really helpful in sorting that out. Our investigators can sort that out. The city attorney's office can sort that out. We'll go talk to the union. We'll make a whole thing of it until it stops happening. So yeah, that's kind of how it works under the current situation. Not that there aren't other ways this could be done if you made kind of bigger changes, but you'd be making changes beyond, I think, city code changes in order to make that happen, as Eric referred to earlier.
Thank you. Any more comments? No. Then we can go to the next question.
Okay, I think we're on number 7, right? Okay. What specific barriers has the IPR encountered in regard to the use of subpoena power? So yeah, I think we talked about this a little when I was here before with the big group. We do have subpoena power, but we basically have no enforcement mechanism. Why that is a question for past members of city council. IPR we're a creature of city code. And so we have the authority that city council has decided to give us over the, I guess, 2 decades plus a couple of years that IPR has been around. When IPR first started out, didn't have really much power at all. We couldn't do our own investigations. I think I've been at IPR for a little more than 3 years. So we being the people who worked there a long, long time ago, nobody is currently at IPR from that group, but they couldn't do their own investigations. I think they would take complaints in and then send them over to internal affairs who would investigate. So that has evolved over the years, but subpoena power is something that we sort of nominally have, but if anybody ever really wanted to go to the mat, I don't think we'd be able to get a lot accomplished. Fortunately, most organizations that we're subpoenaing have somebody who deals with those, and they just kind of say, okay, what do you need? All right. And they generally give it to us. So although it is kind of a power where you're kind of flexing your muscles, and you might not have a ton to back it up, we generally do get good results. I know Eric's had subpoenas on lots of cases, so if you want to add anything, go ahead. But it's something that certainly could be improved, and it should be improved, because there will be a day when this does need to go to the mat, and you're going to want to have something there other than just kind of wishful thinking that somebody put in city code a long time ago and then never really tied it off.
Absolutely. I'd say the bulk of the subpoenas that I've served related to investigations have been for documentary evidence, video footage, or incident reports, or just other documentation or records. And I'm trying to think, I can't think of a time in that context where someone has declined to comply with it. We have served subpoenas for records relating to other law enforcement agencies' live investigations, and they haven't complied with that. We haven't attempted to litigate the issue or anything like that. Like what Ross was saying, we don't have a lot of teeth behind the subpoena, but generally speaking, for documentary evidence, we have a very good track record with it.
And as it stands now, if we run into that situation where somebody were to, a law enforcement agency were to say, no, this, somebody other than PPB were to say, no, this is a live investigation, we're not handing this over because of, X reason. And we would go to the city attorney's office and say, hey, can you fight this for us? And they would make that call. It doesn't really happen very often. I can't think of a recent example, but that would then be up to the city attorney's office. And I think they know that they obviously know that we don't have real enforcement mechanism behind that. So that's absolutely something that needs to be improved on, in the next iteration of police accountability.
Yes, Commissioner Monica.
Yeah, I wonder if you could be a little bit more specific by improved upon. What exactly would be helpful when you're saying improving subpoena power? What would be the most helpful?
Well, I think the city attorney's office would be able to advise you on that better than I can. I think that, you know, there basically just needs to be an enforcement mechanism. I think it just needs to be looked into more thoroughly. And I think there's probably plenty of other models out there that you could copy. I mean, lots of people have subpoena power. It's not that rare of a thing. So, you know, my impression is just this is something that never really was followed through on by city council a long time ago. And again, none of the current elected officials, but people a long time ago. So I would think that would be something the city attorney's office could kind of come up with something, you know, relatively quickly. And then if people are willing to support it, which I would expect they would be.
Commissioner Gunn? Commissioner, I think you are in mute. We can.
Sorry about that. I muted because we had that weird sound that's happening. It's not coming from my phone, but anyway, yeah, in the city code section about IPR, which I pasted into the chat, it says any person who fails to comply with a subpoena will be subject to contempt proceedings as prescribed by state law. Now, are you saying that that has no power, those words that are in the city code?
Am I muted or am I, okay, you can hear me, right? What I've been told by the city attorney's office is that does not have a very specific authority tied to it, and that there would need to be some kind of, I think, corresponding city code, that you can't just point to the state statute and have that be sufficient. But again, if you're looking at a way to improve this, I would talk to the city attorney's office and get more specific advice.
Thank you. Let me see, is there more questions? Oh, no. Now we can go to question 8.
Okay, number 8. Can you point to parts of the police association and or police commanding officers association contracts that hinder IPR's ability to directly compel officer testimony? I believe that in the PPA contract, that's Articles 61 and 62. I think Eric actually looked this up, so thank you for doing that when I was out of the office. And then I think that, you know, the other part of this would be kind of the officer's Bill of Rights that are going to be in Oregon state statutes. So like a lot of other things in our work, you know, there's one layer of it in city code, there's another layer possibly at, you know, at the state statutory level. Some of these things are kind of, you know, enshrined by Supreme Court decisions. I'm talking about just kind of broader police accountability things, but it's a lot of layers. It's a lot of layers to penetrate to change some of these things. And I think that, you know, to directly compel, I think you would probably need to make more changes than just negotiating a contract. But negotiating the contract would be obviously a big start. I know that they just negotiated the PPA contract for the last couple of years, it felt like. And, you know, at least from what I heard, there was no movement in this direction whatsoever. I don't even think it made it to the table. So that's a challenge. It's a big heavy rock to turn over. Eric, did you have anything you want to add on this one?
Oh, am I off? Oh, I am off. Good. No, not particularly. Just like Ross said, you know, the protections, the officer's Bill of Rights that's in the collective bargaining agreement. A version of that is in Oregon state law, and other versions of it are in effect in other states of the union. So if you Google officer's Bill of Rights, you'll find a lot of information out there about that.
I've looked a few times, and they are remarkably similar state to state, and that's obviously not a coincidence. But yeah, a lot of similarities.
Yeah.
Thank you. Is there any questions or comments? No? Thank you. We can go to question number 9.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying to keep these answers shorter than the first ones, if you can't tell, but I'll keep trying to do that because I know you guys have other things to do tonight. Number 9, please explain the certifications or classification of IPR as an entity that allows access to police databases, which recently changed. I'm assuming that is referring to the LEDS bill that we talked about earlier. We don't have really any classification or certification as an agency before that bill, other than being a creature of city code. We're an office created by city code, just like any other City of Portland office is. What I'm referring to is the LEDS bill. That allows us to have access to criminal justice information systems, what we refer to as CJIS. And the way that we got that in that bill, which sounds really complicated and kind of roundabout, is to say that we met the definition of a criminal justice agency, because the state statute said nobody gets access to CJIS information without being a criminal justice agency. The definition of a criminal justice agency is it lists a bunch of things that are law enforcement agencies and things like that. And so it's a very, very narrow definition. And so the bill that we asked for and testified on a bunch of times, and eventually got passed. And then that bill had been up multiple legislative sessions before, but hadn't passed. So we were fortunate that it was passed this time, and now we're trying to implement the changes. That just said, I think it said civilian oversight of law enforcement agency does fit the definition of a criminal justice agency for the purposes of getting access to CJIS information. So that definition covers IPR. I'm sure it will cover, I think it was designed to cover the new accountability system that you all are working to put together. But other than that, there's not really there's an organization called NACOL, which is the national, you know what that is. Okay. So they give certifications, but they don't really get you access to anything or give you any powers or anything like that. One thing that I would mention, and this isn't really a certification, but every aspect of this work and everybody that gets to have eyes on this work has to go through a lot of background checks. And so that's not the same thing as a classification or a certification, but it is a big hoop you have to jump through, and that all your employees have to jump through when they get hired, so that they can look at all this stuff. It's a lot of sensitive information. I mean, I think the way that we're trying to get access to police reports is an illustration of just how hard it is to get access to this stuff and how closely held it is. And there is a ton of very sensitive information about people in there. You can only imagine, domestic violence investigations, sexual assault investigations. There's a ton of really sensitive stuff in there. So there's really good reason why it's so carefully held. But it also makes it hard to kind of, get in there. And I think there's only about 160 or 180 civilian oversight of law enforcement agencies in the whole country. And there's about 18,000 law enforcement agencies. And so there isn't really a well-developed, I think, state to state case law or statutes kind of going state to state to create these things. We've only got 2 in Oregon. There's IPR in Portland, and then there's an organization in Eugene that I'm not terribly familiar with. But I think they're significantly kind of less funded and developed than IPR is. I don't think they've been around as long. And so, I mean, that's only 2 in a whole state. So when you go to the legislature and say, we need you to change the rules so we can get this, they very quickly say, that sounds like a Portland problem. Go talk to your Portland City Council. And so you bang your head against that wall pretty quickly. Good advocates are obviously very important.
Any additional comments? Okay, then we can go to question number 10.
Okay, I think we've talked about a lot of this before, but question number 10 is, isn't the city code clear about IPR having access to all the records it needs? Related question, out of curiosity, when IPR has to file records requests to get info from the Bureau, are they charging for that? So they don't charge us for the records requests. City code is clear about that. It's clear that we get it. It's not clear how we get it. And so when we first, when IPR, and this was multiple people ago, but when they first started saying we really need direct access to the region database that has all these police reports in it, they were told, well, you don't have access to this CGIS information, and you are prohibited from having that by state law, by federal law, by all these other things. So you can't have direct access. You can still get the reports, you just have to make a request. And so that's how things have been for a very, very, very long time. And then getting this bill finally passed, and now us, slowly trying to jump through all the hoops to implement it with Oregon State Police and with the Bureau is a way to get more direct access. So city code can say whatever it wants, but you're still subject to state law and to the keepers of that information. And a lot of the information, because police obviously have access to all these other networks of information. I mean, CGIS and LEDs and all these different things. And so you can say that IPR has access to everything in city code, but all those different things that the police bureau has access to, that all functions under state law and federal law. And so you've just got a million different kind of rules tied in a big knot. And so it's not as simple as just changing city code and saying, well, we get access to it. City code says we do. They're like, great, make your request and we'll give you what you have access to, what we can legally give you. And, it's possible that a law enforcement agency could use that as a delaying tactic or to try to make your job harder. I think what we see is not that, and I'm not saying that hasn't happened in the past. What we see currently is not that. I think what we see is just that this is just really, really, really complicated stuff. And, they know that PBB knows they're going to be audited by Oregon State Police, and they can't give things out that they can't legally give out without going through all the proper channels and making proper requests. Oregon State Police knows they're going to get audited by the FBI. I'm sure somebody's eyeballing what the FBI does too. And so it's just all these kind of different layers of oversight about what you do with this sensitive information. And so city code is kind of the least powerful of any of those layers of rules.
Okay, if we don't have any questions, we can go to 11.
Okay. And sorry, Eric, if you want to add anything, please jump in. I'm just trying to be.
Oh, yeah, no, I thought I think you captured everything, Ross.
Okay, number 11, hypothetical question. If body-worn cameras have widespread adoption in Portland, what issues would you foresee in regards to accessing this information? So we have been incredibly intentionally obnoxious to the city about making sure that we have direct access to body camera footage. We do not want to have another situation where we have indirect access the way we do with police reports. So whenever any milestone is reached, I send out a bunch of emails, force a bunch of people to go to meetings, in other parts of the city that are kind of overseeing the implementation of this, and just saying, you cannot forget about us. If we get to the end of this and we don't have direct access, I probably should make some kind of a direct violent threat in a public meeting, but just fill in the rest of it for yourself. But, it's incredibly important that we have this. Our cases have to wait sometimes because we're waiting on a record, on a police report. And body cameras, they're not going to be a silver bullet, but they're going to be a ton more information than we have now. And we desperately, desperately need that. And we desperately need to have direct access. And we need to be able to do our own searches so that we can, a lot of these body camera things, the technology is really incredible, where if you have, Officer A right here, who you think is the involved officer, and you have Officer B over here and C over here and D somewhere down there, they can all link together. But we don't want to take somebody's word for that. We want to be able to see that we have Officer A's footage and B's and C's and D's. And we don't want them to just send us the videos. We want to be able to access the GPS functions and all these other things, because there's, these do a lot more than just record video. They do a ton of stuff. And we really need to have access to all of that. And there's things like, you can look at who else had access to something. You can look at who else reviewed something. And we have investigations sometimes where an officer may have violated policy and the sergeant might have been aware of it, but they didn't file the proper report. And now we're investigating the sergeant as well. We need to know if that sergeant viewed that video before he made that report, if he took the proper steps. And so, direct access is incredibly important for us, as it will be for the new accountability system when that gets up and running. So, we're not going to let it pass us by, and don't let it pass don't let it pass what you're putting together by either, obviously. I'm sure I don't have to tell you that, but it's very important.
Thank you. And Co-Chair and Commissioner Obi has a question. Go ahead, Co-Chair.
Thank you. I guess I'm kind of extrapolating based on footage from dash cams, but that information, when you need it, where is it stored? And then is it possible that body cam footage will be stored somewhere else, like, you know, IT with Portland, so that the police, of course, can have access to it, and then also IPAC could have access to it without having that request chain of command as easy?
From what I know about most of the body cam vendors, they provide often an internet-based system where all that stuff lives. So right now, if you have dash cams, which a small number of PPV vehicles have, I think it's like 10 vehicles or something like that, 10 or 15. I think that usually gets uploaded to DIMS, right, Eric?
I think that it is part of DIMS, but it may be a separate storage system. We make records requests for mobile audio video footage from AV cars.
Right. So this would be, and I think it's in part because it's just such a massive amount of data to store that it lives kind of on its own system. I don't think it would be possible to even put it into the police bureau system. I mean, these are government systems. They're rusty and dusty, and they couldn't handle that much information in a million years. So, you know, the good thing about that is that you can control who has access to that, and you can control permissions. And, you know, you could say, okay, if a video comes up, every PPV officer has access to that video. Or you could say only that officer has access to the video if it was on his body cam, and then anybody higher in rank than him, so maybe sergeants and above. Or you could say, no, it's just directly his chain of command. Or, you know, I think you could kind of design it any way you want. You know, the good thing, if there's a silver lining to be the last big city to adopt body cameras, it's that a lot of these issues have been, you know, we're not the first person over the wall. A lot of people have fought through this, and a lot of progress has been made, and the technology has improved a lot. So yeah, I think that, you know, who owns it is very, very important. How it gets released to the public is very, very important. I think all the things that are behind your question are incredibly important. But yeah, it needs to live in a place where the bureau's going to need access to it, but a lot of other people are going to as well. It can't just be in the police bureau, because frankly, they just don't have the capacity to manage something that big. It's enormous, and the technology makes it, you know, a lot more manageable than a lot of the other systems that we've been talking about this evening, because a lot of those are pretty old and clunky. And the body camera stuff, I mean, there's a lot of money in it for these vendors. So it really is, I mean, compared to these other government systems, it's really, really cutting edge. And so I think it's much more searchable. But yeah, I mean, I agree. It needs to live somewhere where we can all kind of tap into it when we need to, and also be carefully protected at the same time.
Thank you. Before we go to public meeting for this portion of our meeting, is there any other comment or questions? Okay. Let's go. We will now take public comment on the issues discussed on the briefing. We ask members of the public to keep their comments on the briefing or questions to the briefers to 2 minutes in length at most, and raise their hand in Zoom if you like to speak. Okay, I don't see anybody from the public have questions. Again, for the commissioners, any other questions? Comments? No? Okay, then we want to thank you, Director Ross Caldwell and Eric Berry, the investigators coordinator, on behalf of the PAC Commission. We really appreciate all the information and all the answers and all your comments, and we're very thankful that you were here. Thank you very much for visiting us this meeting.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate all your work, and thank you for doing it. Talk to you soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Thank you. Okay, it's 8:18. We will take a break and we will come back at 8:28. Thank you. Thank you. Now, our next item on our agenda, we're gonna have reports back from subcommittee members. We're gonna have 3 to 5 minutes each. First, and then we will move into discussions first by asking members of the subcommittee to report back on what they were looking into since the last meetings. And we have the notes here. We have Commissioner Dan on compelling testimony. CIMAP, that's not here. Obi, Co-Chair Obi, police records and or compelling testimony. Tirsa, Commissioner Tirsa, subpoena powers. And Commissioner Angie and Monica, data and body cameras. We can start. Thank you. Who would like to start?
Yeah, so I'll start.
Thank
I
you.
was both on the compelling testimony and police records portion, and working both with Dan and CMOB. I think staff will get to this later on, but there was a little bit of a changing of the members of this subcommittee. In regards to my research, I actually looked up multiple different cities who have similar oversight boards, kind of as mentioned in the previous discussion that we had earlier this meeting. And when looking at their charters, they strongly discussed or strongly reported that access to information and police records was just built into their systems. Many cities would write in the charters that are located on their cities, .gov websites that these police accountability commissions are able to share access. Now, delving into what we just learned today, it seems like I'm sure that they have their difficulties with requests of records as well. But it does seem like that is one core thing that it's going to be in our document and pretty easily listed that our commission should have access to police records, and that honestly would be it. Like, to the allowable limits of city, state, and federal law, we should have access to police records. I think it's going to be pretty simple to say. I think it's actually teasing out the specifics of it, just as we heard, and that's why today's meeting was so great. Teasing out the specifics of how we're able to get those police records is going to be what we should delve into both in our document and into future phases of work.
Thank you, Co-Chair Obi. Who's next? Who would like to go next?
Well, I think I'll also Dan and I are on the compelling testimony too, and very similar. And I know that Dan will probably have something to say as well, because he's very well versed in this. But the compelling testimony portion is less ingrained in many cities' charters. I mean, you can look at like who has ability to compel testimony and subpoena power. I think someone will be like yes and no. This is I guess it's a little bit difficult because we have to abide by certain city, state, and federal laws. And when you look at some specific states, the ability to compel testimony of an officer is not there, or it's or was actually recently rolled out in a specific example. I think we have good established ones though in regards to places like New York or Cambridge, Massachusetts, and then we mentioned in our own previous documents some other best practices as well, like even including I believe San Diego, maybe San Diego County, not San Diego City. But there are pretty specific examples where compelling testimony is ingrained in these charters as well. We will probably end up mimicking some of those that seemingly have worked. I am a little enlightened to hear what I have to say about compelling testimony and how it's not necessarily as difficult as I thought it would be. And I know we'll discuss this later, but it didn't seem like it was as difficult or as antagonistic as I thought it would be. So maybe just shoring that up too, now that we've heard what IPR has to say, and discuss how that can be streamlined is now what I'm thinking more of. But thank you on that too.
Thank you, Co-Chair Obi. Commissioner Dan?
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, it was nice to be able to work on this together. I think one of the things that was mentioned by IPR is that they don't think it's that important for the oversight body to compel officer testimony directly, but I think one of the things the community expects and what is written in the charter is that is what's supposed to happen. You know what I mean? So that's one of the reasons I asked the question about the Bureau of Human Resources, which right now has authority over all the employees in the city. And it's something I think we should look at if we want to come up with a plan B, which I've been talking about since the beginning. And another thing that that we talked about briefly was that in 2025, there's going to be a city manager that oversees everybody in the entire city. And we don't really know what that's going to look like. And, you know, we might want to kind of build in language about what that'll look like into the charter, into the city code as well, to make sure that the board continues to be able to function. And then I guess the last thing I want to cover that we talked about when we were having our little informal work session was these constitutional rights and other pesky things that we have to overcome that that are either in the Constitution itself, you know, the right to against self-incrimination. There also something that I looked up referenced the 14th, so that's the 5th Amendment, and something referenced the 14th Amendment about people's rights, and I think that's partly where officers' rights derive from for the Lieberger warning and the Loudermill hearing that we talked about, where they have the right to at the Loudermill hearing where they have the right to appeal discipline. That's at the tail end of the process, but just really want to make sure that we're very aware of these legal traps that I guess what I got out of what the IPR just told us is that this is something I've said before, you can't just wave a magic wand and make the system work the way it's written, you know. So I think we need to keep looking for those workarounds where we can make it work the way it's written without violating officers' rights or community members' rights. Yeah, so we didn't do the subpoenas. We talked about them, but I'll stop there since other people covered that. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Dan. Commissioner Monica or Commissioner Tirsa?
Sure. You know, most of the research I did on body cameras was it's interesting. Body cameras were implemented throughout the nation in different police departments without a lot of research at first. And then it has been studied significantly in different places where it was started in just a few of the police officers and not the others, and there was comparisons as to who got more complaints or what kind of interactions they had, and it didn't seem like it made a huge difference in the number of complaints to police. But I think what I am getting from IPR is that it's going to be so much easier to access information rather than asking for police reports. Is getting that video information is going to help to save a lot of time, which I see the benefit in that. I also did some reading on the ACLU and their concerns about body camera footage. Who is going to store this information? Where is it going to be stored? How are we going to protect citizens' rights to their privacy? So those are really important questions to put to think about. There's also some questions about allowing police officers to turn on and off their cameras. What kind of limitations are there going to be into that topic? Then questions about having body cameras on police officers, does that decrease the number of calls for domestic violence calls because people calling know that there's going to be a camera turned on when the police officer comes into the scene? So does that decrease calls for help for certain things that are more sensitive? Really complicated questions that we really have to think about. And then let's see what else, if I'm forgetting anything. Yeah, I think a lot of worry about where this information is going to be stored, how it's going to be used, for how long is that information going to be kept, and who is going to decide what information needs to be taken out of those databases because they're holding information that is sensitive to, citizens. So if you don't need to hold some video footage because it doesn't hold any possible investigation, then that needs to be taken out and not be part of the database, because it is video of citizens, and that the ACLU had a lot of concerns about that.
Thank you, Commissioner. Co-chair Commissioner Tirsa.
Hello. I found I came across a couple of cities where their police oversight programs or boards do have subpoena power, but I came across many that did not. And then what was also interesting is that for a few that did not have subpoena power, did have the authority to compel testimony, to have officers compel testimony. And so after hearing IPR today, and them mentioning that they do have the ability to compel testimony, but subpoena power would give them the power, the authority to ensure that a law enforcement agency that is not complying with a subpoena that they've issued would be able to comply. So I think having subpoena power would be really beneficial and can save the new oversight program some time, instead of having to go through hurdles, because it seems like right now IPR, while they are able to compel an officer for testimony, sometimes they have to go through hurdles to acquire necessary records, and a hurdle or a barrier being having to ask city attorney, and then the city attorney's office, and then the city attorney's requesting those needed records on behalf of IPR. Let's see. Yeah, that's what I have.
Thank you, Commissioner Co-chair Tirsa. I also am going to ask Commissioner Sophia if she was able to work with Angie. No? Okay, thank you. I mean, now this is an open discussion, and we ask to follow our normal discussion rules. Please be brief each time you speak, even though you can speak multiple times. Please be facilitated, and remember that the commission uses a weighted stack in our discussion. Finally, please be forward-looking in your comments, and what we're gonna discuss is the question, what do you want to see included in that draft of PAC areas of agreement on access to information? Oh, and I'm sorry, before I give you, is Commissioner May, welcome. Do you have any reporting or anything you want to add to the discussion?
I do not for today,
Okay, thank you, Commissioner May. And it's nice
but I
to,
think I will have some for the next meeting, definitely.
that sounds great. Thank you very much. I will pass it then to Co-Chair Obi.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for the research. I really appreciate it. I think I was talking about this before. I've mentioned a few times that like we have the probably the not cool section and the not cool subcommittee because it may be a little bit boring. I think when it comes to wishes, we can easily state in one sentence, like I think the upcoming review board should have the ability to compel testimony, access police records, have the power to subpoena individuals in a appropriate manner, and then have access or direct access to data and body cams. And like summarize in one sentence or one paragraph of what we should have. But then the nuances are exactly what IPR said today. Like once again, just like really harping on how informative that was for what we're going to do over the next few weeks. I think we have a pretty good scaffold of what we're going to write in our different documents, but then just need a little bit more research on what our city would, or I guess on what Portland and Oregon, and then of course the overarching federal and Supreme Court rulings would allow, and then what we are predicting for the next few years, like 2023, 2024, and then any specific change that need to happen in 2025 or 2025, 2026. I do think that it's a pretty nice start to see what IPR had, and it was very nice to see what they found is easy about the process. I do think that there's a lot in the data and body camera section to go over, like of the sub-specifics to if we don't want to lose anything that, or don't want to miss anything that will be encompassed in that section. I think overarching though, not too hard to conceive of what we need to do.
Thank you, Co-Chair Obi. Okay, yes, staff?
Yes, hi. So I just wanted to mention one thing about the bargaining around the excuse me, the body cameras is ongoing. And it may be something that we could get some more information about from the folks who are involved in that collective bargaining arrangement. That bargaining is likely to influence, if not directly determine, where the footage is for the where the footage is held, who owns that within the city org chart, things like that. That will likely be determined before the PAC finishes its work and presents its code recommendation package to City Council, at least as a starting point. So that's something that we can try and get more information on for you as well, because it may be something that is influenceable, or maybe something that is a system that the PAC's recommendations will need to work within. Thank you.
Thank you, staff. Yeah, Co-Chair Obi?
Yeah, and thanks for bringing that up, staff. Yeah, I think we had kind of pushed some ideas around of should the data and body camera section be in a centralized, or like, you know, the city of Portland has it, what we mentioned before in the IPR discussion. City of Portland has it. New oversight board can access it directly without having to do a lengthy police review process or a police records request. And then the police can access it too. Like, you know, not stopping them from having their information. They can access it as well. Not sure if it needs to be a hierarchy or everyone has the ability to, but so these two things don't get in the way. It seems like what they answered today was that the timeline can either be pretty good within the same day for information versus pretty bad within multiple weeks. And that is something we'd want to shore up as well. And any single jump that we can get to in regards to getting information quickly would just make the system more efficient. Whether or not it's never mind, not the best of what we think it is, it should be efficient no matter what.
Thank you, Co-Chair Obi. I will pass it to staff.
Thank you. Just to clarify, the previous comment was not designed to imply that you could not include something about the big picture body cameras in your areas of agreement. If the subcommittee and eventually the full commission have thoughts on how that should operate, that's definitely something you'd be able to do. I just wanted to flag that there may be things between the conclusion of that document and this phase of work and the eventual end of the PAC process next year, which may influence things that happen later. Having said that, in areas of agreement is essentially the statement of the position of the PAC on some of these subjects. So it's okay to cover it. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't inadvertently limiting the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Dan?
Yes, so when Co-Chair Oju and I were talking about the subpoena power issue, and just reading the city code again tonight, there are criminal consequences for not complying with a subpoena. You can be held in contempt. And, if it's a witness, if it's somebody out in the community who doesn't feel like they want to talk to the new review board, I don't want, we were talking about, we don't want to put somebody in that position, right? Where a member of the community might face criminal consequences if they don't comply with a subpoena. So I don't know what the laws are around that, or if there's some other, alternative to charging them with contempt to get them to comply, because you have to hold something over people's heads if you want them to. I was very impressed that the IPR said most of the people that he sends subpoenas to, except for police, comply with it, even though they apparently can't enforce it, which is very strange. So that comment, he said, just because he wrote it in the city code doesn't mean it can happen. Makes me feel like we have to be, as I've been saying this all along, but we have to be really careful to be very precise about what we mean and make sure that what we write is something that can be put into effect. So I don't know if other people have thoughts about the consequences of not responding to a subpoena from the new system, but that was just something that came across our discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Dan. Commissioner Sophia?
Yes, just a comment on enforcing compelling testimony. I think this is probably something that's can possibly be answered when we have our full-time staff attorneys, because someone has to file that request. Someone has to file that. I can't remember the term. They have to file a contempt, and it has to be it's a legal process. Somebody has to actually file it. And maybe that's partly why that they're saying that it kind of doesn't have any weight. Maybe there's nobody to do it. It definitely has to be filed in a court. It has to be an attorney, somebody knows what they're doing. So, as we think about some of these items, maybe we should think about having our own, how we will incorporate our own attorneys into this whole process and how we could resolve some of these issues. So thank you.
Thank you. Any additional comment or discussion on these items about what would you like to bring to see included on the draft of the PAC areas of agreement on access to information? Okay, since it's A52, we will go to public comment or next step. I thought it was public comment, but we can go to next steps. And I will pass it to staff and the co-chairs.
Yeah, thank you. So I think Co-Chair Obi might have more detail on this, but the purpose of this item is to essentially determine what the members of the subcommittee will be looking into between now and the next meeting of the subcommittee. So the next meeting of the subcommittee is on December 29th. And in order to meet the overall timeline for the subcommittee, it'd be good to have a very rough draft that can be discussed in that meeting towards the end of it. So if there's a way to potentially clarify the request a little further, happy to do it, but essentially I'll pass it over to the co-chair Obi to talk about how and what sort of categories of information, how to get that done. Thank you.
Staff, you are going to, your sound is cutting off. We don't hear you anymore, but I will pass it to co-chair Obi and then see if we can get back to staff.
Sure. Yeah, and we'll give it back when staff comes back. Yeah, so we're heading into the kind of the, at least for our subcommittee, the winter break. One might say we're not meeting until December 29th. I think in the in-between, it would be best if we start individual portions of documents, specifically the 4 groups that we're looking at. Based on the rules or established as a subcommittee, and apologize if I send out an incorrect email beforehand, but based on the rules, each group can only have 2 or 3 people in it to not end up being a quorum of the group when we perform each document. So I think the setup groups that we have now would work, with the exception of Commissioner Seamob moving to a different subcommittee, and then just some of the rearrangements. And I know that I believe Angie's going to be missing this. Commissioner Angie's going to be missing this meeting and the next meeting as well, from what the email said. So if we could thank you, May, for that comment. If we could kind of just relist the groups, and then what I will plan on doing is sending out an email with different cities that I have found that have specific charters similar to this. And then we also have what IPR has that's encoded in our city charter. If kind of looking at those documents and then starting kind of a rough draft of what we have and including notes from there for each group, then we can hopefully by December 27th send that out, kind of look at those and be ready for the next meeting to discuss.
Thank you, and thank you, Commissioner May, for your volunteer to do police records. Thank you very much. We will go to Commissioner Monica.
Yeah, if Commissioner Andrew's not going to be here in the next couple of meetings, I've got some good research on body cameras, but data has not been really looked into, and Commissioner Angie is not going to be here. So I'm worried the data is not going to get done. And I could definitely write something up for body cameras. I feel like I've got enough information to get body cameras into a pretty good rough document. We need somebody for data though.
Thank you, Commissioner Monica. Co-chair Obi, do you want to say something, or do you have? Okay, go ahead.
Yes, I was definitely looking at that too. Thank you so much for the work on the body cams. Thank you for those emails. Yeah. How about thank you, May, if you add data to your list, and please work with me on that. If you could send an email, maybe we could schedule time to just talk about it. That would be great too, because I'd love to help out on that too.
Thank you.
Let me hear what Steph has to say, actually.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry. All right, sorry about that. Yeah, if you could clarify, because I know 2 members of the subcommittee have joined subsequent to the last meeting of the subcommittee, what data exactly means. That's obviously a very broad term. So just a request for if co-chair could clarify that for everyone. But I know that there's a lot of things it could mean, so just figured it'd be helpful. Thank you.
So yeah, one of my concerns coming into before the subcommittee started was the actual like, computer type of record. So I mean, I think that is only encompassed in our specific group. So looking at how information is shared, how it's stored, and I know body cams are going to overlap with that, how it's processed, and then access to the specific databases that kind of RPR mentioned. It seems like CGIS was one that I think we'll now have to look into a fair amount, but the kind of the overarching access to different systems and how a new accountability system or how a new account system can carefully respecting privacy, but in an efficient manner, access these things to get their jobs done in a timely fashion and more efficient fashion.
Thank you, Co-Chair Obi. Commissioner Dan?
So I have sent to the members who were the members of the subcommittee a week or so ago the sections of the IPR code that already exist that reflect all these areas that we're talking about. And see what day I sent that out. I don't know. I sent it to the co-chair. I don't understand how to use Outlook. So anyway, I'll find it and can send it again. But I think that's helpful because some of that language is stuff that we might want to lift and put into what we're doing. It talks about within the boundaries of state law and things like that. One thing that we did not talk about at all tonight, which is very, very important, is that we're talking about infusing the new board with these authorities to subpoena, to compel officer testimony. Are we talking about the community members who are going to be the board, or are we talking about the staff, or are the community members delegating that authority to the staff? I think that is something that is a fundamental question that really we should answer in whatever we write up, right? So let's say the community members are holding a hearing about an incident that happened and somebody didn't talk to the investigators. Will the community members subpoena that person to come in? And can they compel the officer to come in and talk to them at that hearing? So I think that's a really important question. It's going to feed into the subcommittee I'm working on, the one that's dealing with the complaints and officer accountability from the beginning to end. But I just think that's a really important thing for us to think about. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, it is 9:01. We need to go to public comment. We will now take open public comment on the issues of the PAC is discussing. All community members can also tell their story about policing and police accountability. We ask members of the public to keep their comments or questions to 2 minutes in length and raise their hand in Zoom if you like to speak. Okay, I will call for public comment, Commissioner Debbie Iona.
Thank you. I just have a question. Is this subcommittee also going to be dealing with the public's access to information? I just mean like the general public and, you know, finding information about cases and data and all that kind of stuff. So I haven't heard you talk about that tonight, but you may have done it some other time. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I will pass it to Co-Chair Obi.
Thanks for coming, Commissioner Debbie, and great question. We actually definitely discussed this in the first meeting, and it seems like it does fall into a subsequent stage of work or phase of work. But absolutely good question. We should stay on top of it, even if hopefully another member of the subcommittee joins the future subcommittee, but that technically isn't part of this one.
Thank you. Thank you, Co-Chair. Staff?
Yeah. And just to add to that, it is part of the next phase of work specifically. So the structure and details, the definition of the structure and details phase, which is the fourth phase of work, we're currently in the third, includes the public reporting component as a direct outcome of it. And so it is one of the very next things that will come out, and there'll actually be a separate document explicitly focused on the public information reporting and all that sort of stuff. It's its own thing next time in the process. Thank you.
We're gonna go for the garden plot, and I will ask Co-Chair Obi if he has anything to add to the garden plot. You are in mute.
Saying just yeah. No, I did not have. I think we went over what our plan will be over the next 2 weeks. I did not have any major things to add.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Staff?
Nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay, I don't have anything then. We can say thank you to all the members who attended today's meeting and for your contributions today. Thank you also to the interpreters supporting access to meetings of the Police Accountability Commission and its subcommittees for all Portlanders. Thank you to our briefers for coming and spending your time sharing your thoughts with the commission and the public. Finally, thank you to all the members of the community for attending and contributing your thoughts and questions. Please submit advanced public comment prior to future meetings. If you're not already signed up for emails updates, please also sign up to receive updates for the PAC. The next meeting on the subcommittee will be December 29. It's now 9:05 and this meeting is adjourned.